I'll be presenting my SRP on the effect of pond pollutants on plant growth. Before we dive into the specifics of my project, I would like to talk a little bit about myself. My name is Jackson Hare, and I attend Tunstall High School. And in the fall of 2023, I plan to attend Virginia Tech to major in accounting to attain my master's degree. So you may be asking yourself, why did I choose this project? Well, I chose this project because I have a deep love for fishing. My love for fishing is so deep, when we were first choosing our SRP topics, I wanted to test bass specifically. I wanted to inject pesticides into the bass to measure their movements and their reactions. But when I asked Ms. Long and Dr. Bocock about this, they reminded me of the ethics that I learned last year and revealed to me that if I were to inject pesticides into the bass, it would eventually kill the fish. However, the project today will address the gap in literature pertaining to the pollutants' effect on plant growth. It will give the general public, specifically factory workers and farmers, the information they need pertaining to what they should be releasing into the environment. The information found within my project today can be information that could be used for years to come. Prior to conducting my study, I reviewed several pieces of literature. I'll be discussing three main topics tonight: water quality, pollution, and nitrates. Water quality as a whole is a very vast topic, but Fondo Fato et al. Narrowed down the definition to one specific meaning. That meaning is when a human uses any basic water quality test kit in order to find pH level and or water clarity. The ways of finding these variables can be divided into two different methods: standard methods and advanced methods. For the standard methods, I found that using basic water quality test kits would do just fine. However, if you were to use the advanced methods, it will ensure that every variable was accounted for. However, the advanced methods require you to test various depths of the water. The literature established these results mainly from the presence of pH. It is found that the lower the pH a pond has, the more pond pollutants there will be. I just mentioned the word pollutant, therefore the question about what a pollutant is needs to be answered. On the definition of what a pollutant actually is a very controversial one. But for the literature I reviewed, they describe a pollutant as that contaminates the water or allows plants to grow. These pollutants can enter these ponds in a various amount of ways. The main reason is from runoff from rainwater or from bad storms. Following that, the use of pesticide use by farmers has vastly increased, meaning the more and more runoff from farmer pesticide use has increased as well. This is causing a rise in pollution rate for local farms. Factory gases has also caused pollution to rise in the ecosystem as well. With all this information, researchers believe that the general public can take action against the rising levels of pollutants. Farmers being careful with each of the pesticides they put on their plants is a must, and all of us being careful with each thing that we put into the environment is a must as well. The specific pollutant that has a positive effect on plant growth are nitrates. Nitrates are defined as a groundwater pollutant that is introduced into an ecosystem via runoff from rainwater or from farmer pesticide use. This pollutant causes plants to grow within ponds. The literature states that when nitrates are added to plants, they grow over 200% from where they first started. These numbers are groundbreaking for my topic and will assist me in addressing the gap pertaining to the pollutant's effect on plant growth. After conducting my literature review, I created a research question I wanted to answer. That question reads: how do pollutants in a particular pond affect plant growth? When answering my research question, I created two hypotheses: my research hypothesis and my null hypothesis. My research hypothesis states that if there is a specific type of pollutant present, then there will be positive plant growth. My null hypothesis states that if there is a specific type of pollutant present, then there will be no effect on plant growth. I had three distinct variable groups for my experiment. My independent variable was the ponds that I was able to choose for my testing. For my dependent variable, nitrate concentration, pH level, and dissolved oxygen concentration all served as my dependent variables because that is what I was testing. For my control variable, I used distilled water for my testing. For my materials, I didn't need a lot of items. I used Rubbermaid containers to hold my pond water samples and to transport them from the ponds to the lab. I made use of 2 Lamont water quality tests, one being a precision pH test and the next one being a nitrates test. Also, I used a dissolved oxygen analyzer. For my methodology, I first gathered my materials. After I gathered my materials, I established my sample size and sample population. My overall sample size was 45 because I drew 5 samples from each of the 9 ponds that I tested. For step number 2, I chose the ponds that I wanted to test. I chose 9 geographically different ponds located in Danville, Virginia. For step number 3, I made use of the Lamont's precision pH test in order to test the pH of my samples. For step number 4, I tested the nitrates in the water. I made use of the Lamont nitrates test kit in order to find the exact concentration of nitrates within each sample. For step number 5, I needed to test the dissolved oxygen concentration within each pond. I did this by using the dissolved oxygen analyzer. For my final 2 steps, I compiled raw data and conducted a statistical analysis. For my results section, I wanted to test 3 different categorical variables. The three categorical variables are nitrate concentration, which is measured in particles per minute, pH level, and dissolved oxygen concentration, which is measured in percentages. In order to attain the results for my data, I had to run 3 individual one-way NOVA tests. I needed to run 3 different tests in order to ensure that all variables were accounted for. For all 3 graphs, you will see 9 different colors displaying 9 different ponds, each with error bars displaying statistical differences. For my first variable, I drew results from the average nitrate concentration for each of my 9 ponds. In order for plants to thrive in an ecosystem, there has to be a sufficient range of nitrate concentrations in the water without having too little or too much. To be more specific, Gufu et al. Stated that if there was a range of 0.5 ppm to 1 ppm, then the plant's growth is limited based upon that amount. This information allows my data to show that pond number 8 cannot provide the correct amount of nitrate concentration for maximum growth. Kumar 2020 states that if an ecosystem has a range of 1 ppm to 10 ppm, then sufficient amounts of nitrate concentrations are available for a maximum growth. With this information, it is clear through my data and my graph that all ponds except pond number 8 have the sufficient amounts of nitrate concentration for maximum growth. For my next variable, I drew results from the average pH level of each of my 9 ponds. Through my literature review, specifically from Thato et al., it established that the lower the pH a pond has without going under 5, the more groundwater pollutants there will be, which in my study is the nitrate concentration. With this information, it is clear that ponds 1, 2, 5, and 8 are 4 of the most optimal ponds in order to retain the healthy amounts of pH levels. For my last and final variable, I drew results from the average dissolved oxygen concentration from each of my 9 different ponds. Detailed through my literature review, Inachi et al. Established that when the water is between 80 to 120% of dissolved oxygen concentration, the water is primed for maximum plant growth within the ecosystem. With that being said, ponds 2, 3, 4, and 6 all fall within this range of numbers. This shows that plant growth will strive the most within these specific ponds. In concluding my results section of my study, I would like to state that at the significance level of 0.05, the null hypothesis was rejected with a p-value of p less than 0.001. Based on the error bars in all 3 graphs, it can be concluded that all three variables for all 9 ponds are statistically different. With all 3 graphs displaying statistical differences, there is sufficient evidence that all 3 variables also play into the final conclusion pertaining to which pond should be suggested for plants to be grown to maximum height. Taking all my data into account, I have come to the ultimate conclusion that pond number 2 is the most optimal pond for maximum plant growth because this pond's data falls into every recommended variable category. The results from my study can be used by state workers and farmers because my results give these people the evidence they need to model their ponds after in order to attain a more efficient ecosystem, specifically a better plant environment. With the help of state workers and farmers, the need for efficient pond maintenance will be met with guidelines being set forth within each county. This will improve pond maintenance drastically. I believe that the reason I had only one pond meet the criteria for each variable was because of the variance of the geographical location. While the experimental process went as planned, there was some evident limitations. The first limitation was that I collected my samples the day after it rained, meaning the weather served as a lurking variable. If my samples would have been collected on a week with no rainfall, my results could have been completely different. The next limitation is that I wasn't able to test plants specifically because I was unable to extract plants directly from the pond due to a lack of resources. This limitation leads into the call for future research. The call for future research pertains to professionals running the exact same test that I ran while testing plants specifically to test their growth instead of making inferences. This will allow researchers to be very confident with their findings. This goal can be fulfilled by using much higher quality tests than the ones that I used in my study. Throughout the entire research process, I learned that if I wanted to reach the end goal of completing my experiment, I had to stay true to myself and incorporate my grit into each one of my actions. Not only did this process reassure me of the importance of grit, it also strengthened my love for fishing. This process allowed me to grow closer to the sport of fishing and cherish all the memories that I made. Finally, I would like to thank Ms. Long for being the biggest help along this journey. Next, I would like to thank Ms. Gravitt for assisting me with my statistical analysis. And lastly, I would like to thank Ms. Fain and Ms. Dillon for helping me out in the lab. Thank you for your time, and now I will take any questions that you may have. Yes, Ms. Davis.
I think I heard you say that pond number 2 was most optimal for plant growth. Did I hear you say that?
Yes, ma'am.
And that correlates to giving habitat to the bass. Is that correct?
So Ms. Davis is asking if I chose pond number 2 based on the habitat for the bass. Is that what you're asking?
No, I didn't. Okay, let me scratch the bass. Did you look at the conditions surrounding the ponds to determine like how ponds 1 and 3 through 8 could be changed to be more like pond number 2?
So Ms. Davis is asking if I looked at the physical landscape of the ponds, so throughout all my ponds.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I did look at all the ponds and the physical landscape of each thing, and each pond had different items within the pond. So pond number 2 had a fountain in the pond. So when a pond has a fountain in it, it provides more oxygen for the ponds, and none of the ponds besides pond number 2 had a fountain. The rest of the ponds had either rocks or trees on the ends of the water.
Was pond 2 on a golf course?
Dr. Brown is asking if pond number 2 was on a golf course. Yes, it was located at Tuscarora.
Okay, so potentially, do you think what they use to keep the fairways really nice? Maybe.
So Dr. Brown is asking if the chemicals could have affected the ponds. Yes, I definitely do think that could have affected it.